What happens when the cruelest mockery meets the most dangerous man in the room? A woman publicly humiliated for her size on a transatlantic flight silently prayed to disappear into her first-class seat. Instead, a terrifyingly calm stranger in a bespoke suit didn't just defend her. He pulled out his phone, wired $85 million, and bought the entire Boeing 777 right on the tarmac. He kicked the bully off, but for Penelope, the real danger was just beginning. The heavy scent of jet fuel and expensive espresso lingered in the air of JFK's Terminal 4. Penelope Hayes clutched her boarding pass so tightly her knuckles were white. The small piece of cardstock was a symbol of 3 years of relentless work, early mornings covered in flour, and late nights balancing the books for her small Brooklyn bakery. She had finally saved enough to fly first class to Rome, where she was invited to showcase her signature pastries at the prestigious Villa Borghese Culinary Summit. Penelope was a woman who took up space in a world that constantly told her to shrink. She was plus-sized, a fact she had spent 28 years trying to make peace with. Most days behind the counter of her bakery, enveloped in the warm aroma of vanilla and spun sugar, she felt beautiful. But out here in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a high-society boarding gate, her armor felt paper-thin. She smoothed down her tailored emerald green tunic, hoping it looked as elegant as the price tag promised, and joined the priority boarding line for transatlantic global flight 402. Stepping onto the Boeing 777, Penelope breathed a small sigh of relief. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of soft, ambient lighting, plush cream leather, and polished mahogany. She found Seat 2A, a spacious window pod that promised 12 hours of uninterrupted peace. She carefully stowed her carry-on, a reinforced temperature-controlled box containing her delicate pastry samples, and sank into the soft leather. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes, letting the excitement of Rome wash over her. Then he arrived. "Excuse me, you're in my way." Penelope opened her eyes to find a man standing in the aisle. He was 50-something, deeply tanned, wearing a crisp Brioni suit and sporting a Rolex that probably cost more than Penelope's bakery. His boarding pass read Seat 2B, the pod directly adjoining hers, separated only by a low, retractable privacy divider. "Oh, I'm sorry," Penelope said softly, pulling her knees in so he could pass to his seat. The man, whose name was Arthur Pendleton, a notorious Manhattan hedge fund executive, didn't move. Instead, his eyes raked over Penelope, lingering on her wide hips and full figure. A look of profound, unmasked disgust twisted his features. He didn't sit down. Instead, he snapped his fingers in the air, a sharp, echoing sound that immediately drew the attention of the senior flight attendant. "So can I help you find your seat?" the attendant, a kind-eyed woman named Marie, asked as she rushed over. "You can help me by explaining why I paid $12,000 for a transatlantic ticket only to be forced to sit next to this," Arthur sneered, gesturing toward Penelope with a rolled-up copy of the Wall Street Journal. The cabin instantly went dead silent. The soft clinking of champagne glasses stopped. Penelope's heart plummeted into her stomach, a cold, sickening drop that made her ears ring. "I beg your pardon, sir?" Marie asked, her professional smile faltering. "You heard me." Arthur projected his voice, ensuring the entire cabin of wealthy passengers could hear him. "Look at her. She's practically spilling over the armrest. I am not spending 12 hours sharing my airspace with a fat girl who clearly belongs in the cargo hold. Move her." Penelope felt the blood rush to her cheeks. The walls of the luxurious cabin suddenly felt like they were closing in. She shrank back against the window, instinctively trying to make herself smaller, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked around, desperate for someone to say something, but the other passengers simply looked away, uncomfortable or worse, watched with detached curiosity. "Sir, I must ask you to lower your voice," Marie said, her tone firming up. "Every passenger in this cabin paid for their seat. I cannot move her. The flight is fully booked." "Then downgrade her," Arthur barked, tossing his briefcase onto his seat. "Put her in economy where she belongs. I need space to work, and I will not be subjected to her heavy breathing and overflowing mass. It's a safety hazard. What if we need to evacuate? She'd block the aisle." Tears, hot and humiliating, pricked the corners of Penelope's eyes. She had dealt with cruelty before, but never trapped in a steel tube, never completely isolated in front of a crowd of silent elites. The shame was paralyzing. I can try to make myself smaller," Penelope whispered, her voice cracking. "I won't bother you, I promise." "Don't speak to me," Arthur snapped, glaring down at her. He turned back to the attendant. "Get the captain. Now. I am a Platinum Medallion member, and I sit on the board of 3 companies that use this airline exclusively. I want her off this plane, or moved to the back immediately." Marie looked at Penelope with deep sympathy, but clear panic. She reached for the intercom to call the cockpit. Before her finger could press the button, a voice cut through the tense air. It was a deep, resonant baritone, laced with a faint, chilling Italian accent. It didn't shout, but it carried a weight that made the hairs on the back of Penelope's neck stand up. "The lady isn't going anywhere." Arthur whipped around. From seat 1A, a man slowly stood up. He had been boarding quietly, avoiding attention, but now he commanded all of it. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad, powerful shoulders, hidden beneath a perfectly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit. His jet-black hair was lightly silvered at the temples, and his face was a study in dangerous geometry. Sharp jawline, piercing dark eyes, and a faint, thin scar that ran just below his left cheekbone. This was Vincent Rossi. To the legitimate world, he was a billionaire logistics and shipping magnate. To the underground world of Naples and New York, he was the undisputed head of the Rossi crime syndicate, a man who ended wars with a whisper, and whose very name commanded absolute, terrifying obedience. Vincent stepped out of his pod and walked slowly down the aisle, stopping inches away from Arthur. The sheer physical presence of the man made Arthur take a half-step backward, though the hedge fund manager quickly tried to puff out his chest. "Excuse me," Arthur scoffed. "Mind your own business, pal. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," Vincent said softly, his dark eyes locked onto Arthur's, "because your voice is giving me a headache, and because you are speaking to this woman with a profound lack of respect. She's taking up half the row," Arthur argued, though his voice lacked its previous bravado. "I paid for luxury. I'm entitled to—" "You are entitled to nothing," Vincent interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. "You are a small, loud man wearing a suit you think makes you important. But right now you are merely an insect making noise." The entire cabin held its breath. Even Penelope stopped crying, staring wide-eyed at the towering stranger defending her. Arthur's face flushed purple with rage. "Do you know who I am? I'm Arthur Pendleton. I will have you thrown off this flight along with her. Stewardess gets security." Vincent didn't blink. He calmly reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy encrypted satellite phone. He dialed a single number and raised it to his ear. The silence in the cabin was so absolute that Penelope could hear the line ringing. Alessandro Vincent spoke into the phone. "I am on transatlantic global flight 402 out of JFK. Who owns the holding company for this fleet?" A pause. Penelope watched as Vincent's eyes remained deadlocked on Arthur. "Blackwood Capital Good. Call Richard Davies. Tell him I am purchasing the registration of the aircraft I am currently standing on. Yes, the entire Boeing 777. Whatever his valuation is, add 20% for the inconvenience and wire the funds from the Swiss offshore accounts." Arthur let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Are you insane? You're pretending to buy a commercial airliner over the phone. Who do you think you're fooling? Vincent ignored him. Yes, Alessandro. Effective immediately. This flight is now a private charter under the Rossi Corporation. Inform the tower. He hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Marie, the flight attendant, looked bewildered. So you can't just buy a plane on the tarmac. Suddenly the intercom buzzed. The captain's voice came over the speaker, sounding breathless and deeply confused. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin doors. We are receiving orders from air traffic control and corporate headquarters. This aircraft has just undergone a transfer of ownership. Arthur's jaw dropped. The mocking smile slid off his face, replaced by a pale, sickly realization. Two men in dark suits who had been sitting quietly in the back of the first-class cabin suddenly stood up and moved to flank Vincent. They were built like linebackers, their eyes scanning the cabin for threats. Penelope realized with a jolt that these weren't regular passengers. They were bodyguards. Vincent turned his attention to Marie. Miss, as the new owner of this aircraft, I have the right to dictate the passenger manifest. Correct? Aye. Yes, sir. Technically, if it's a private charter. Marie stammered. Excellent. Vincent finally turned his gaze to Arthur. There was no anger in his eyes, only the cold, mechanical calculation of a predator. Arthur Pendleton, you are trespassing on my private property. Get off my plane. You can't do this, Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I have meetings in Rome. Millions of dollars are on the line. Then you should have learned how to speak to a lady, Vincent replied smoothly. He gestured to his bodyguards. Remove him. If he struggles, ensure he remembers the fall down the jet bridge. The two massive men stepped forward, grabbing Arthur by the arms. Wait, let me get my bags, Arthur pleaded, struggling helplessly as he was practically lifted off the floor. We will mail them to you. Economy class shipping, Vincent said dryly. As Arthur was dragged, kicking and screaming out the cabin door back into the terminal, Vincent turned his attention to the rest of the cabin. The wealthy passengers who had watched Penelope's humiliation in silence were now staring at Vincent in absolute terror. The rest of you, Vincent announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. You sat in silence while a woman was humiliated. I do not tolerate cowards. Take your belongings and exit the aircraft. My assistant will ensure you are given double your ticket value and booked on the next commercial flight. But you will not fly with me. Protests erupted, but a single sharp look from Vincent's dark eyes silenced them. Within 10 minutes, under the bewildered watch of the flight crew, the entire first-class and business-class cabins were evacuated. Penelope sat, frozen, in seat 2. Her heart hammering against her ribs. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, reaching for her pastry box. I'll go too, she whispered, her voice shaking. Thank you for what you did. But I'll go. Vincent turned to her. For the first time, the cold, lethal hardness in his face softened. He stepped closer, offering her a pristine white handkerchief. You, Miss, Vincent said gently, his Italian accent wrapping around the words like warm velvet, are my guest. Please keep your seat. We are going to Rome. The Boeing 777 taxied down the runway, an absolute ghost ship. Behind the closed curtains of first class, the massive commercial airliner was completely empty, save for the bewildered flight crew. Up front, it was just Penelope Vincent and his 2 silent guards who had retreated to the very back row, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows. As the plane broke through the cloud cover over the Atlantic, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Penelope remained rigidly in her seat, clutching the white handkerchief. Her mind was spinning. Who buys an airplane just to win an argument, she thought frantically. A billionaire, royalty, a criminal. Vincent unbuckled his seatbelt and moved from his pod in the first row to seat 2B, the seat Arthur had occupied just an hour ago. He didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he hovered respectfully at the edge of the privacy divider. May I? He asked, gesturing to the seat. Penelope swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, of course. Vincent sat down, crossing his long legs. Up close, Penelope could smell his cologne sandalwood bergamot and something distinctly smoky. It was intoxicating. She looked at his hands. They were large, deeply tanned, with a heavy gold signet ring on his right index finger. He didn't look like a typical corporate CEO. There was a coiled, predatory energy beneath his expensive suit. "I haven't introduced myself," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Vincent Rossi. Penelope Hayes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Rossi, I don't know what to say. You didn't have to do that. It must have cost a fortune." Vincent waved his hand dismissively. "Money is just a tool, Penelope. It is meant to be used to fix problems. That man was a problem." He leaned in slightly, his dark eyes studying her face. "But tell me, why did you apologize to him?" Penelope looked down at her hands. "Because he was right. I am big. I take up space. I'm used to people being upset by it. It's easier to just apologize and shrink." Vincent's jaw tightened. The faint scar on his cheek seemed to pull taut. "Never apologize for existing, Penelope. The world is full of small-minded men who demand that women make themselves less just so they can feel like more. You do not shrink for anyone. Understand." His intensity took her breath away. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with such fierce, absolute certainty. She found herself nodding, a small spark of warmth igniting in her chest. "So," Vincent said, leaning back and letting the tension bleed out of the air. "What takes you to Rome?" Penelope hesitated, then reached into her carry-on and carefully pulled out the temperature-controlled box. "I'm a baker. I own a small shop in Brooklyn. I was invited to the Villa Borghese Culinary Summit to present my work. It's the biggest opportunity of my life." Vincent's eyebrows arched in genuine surprise. "A pastry chef, may I see?" Penelope opened the box. Inside, nestled in protective parchment, were perfectly baked sfogliatelle, flaky shell-shaped Italian pastries, filled with ricotta and candied citrus. "I know it's presumptuous to bring an Italian pastry to Italy." Penelope blushed. "But it's my grandmother's recipe. She immigrated from Naples." Vincent's eyes widened slightly. Without asking, he reached out his large fingers, gently picking up one of the delicate pastries. He took a bite. As he chewed, his eyes closed. For a moment, the terrifying billionaire vanished, replaced by a man struck by a profound memory. "Naples," he whispered, opening his eyes. He looked at Penelope with a newfound reverence. "My mother used to make these on Sunday mornings in the Quartieri Spagnoli. I have paid Michelin-starred chefs thousands of euros in Rome and Milan, and none of them have ever captured this exact taste. The orange zest, the texture. It is perfect." Penelope beamed a genuine, radiant smile that completely transformed her face. The heavy shadows of the airport incident melted away. "Thank you. Truly. That means everything to me." For the next 8 hours, the massive, empty plane became their private sanctuary. They drank vintage Barolo wine and talked. Penelope told him about her struggles opening the bakery, her passion for food, and her solitary life in New York. Vincent listened with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. In return, he told her about growing up poor in Italy, building an empire from the ground up, and the heavy burden of leadership. He left out the blood to the guns and the extortion, but Penelope wasn't naive. She sensed the danger in him, but surprisingly she didn't feel afraid. She felt protected. As the flight neared the Italian coast, the sunrise flooded the cabin with golden light. Vincent was looking at Penelope, captivated by the way the morning sun caught the amber flecks in her eyes when his satellite phone vibrated on the armrest. The mood in the cabin instantly shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sudden biting cold. Vincent picked up the phone, reading the encrypted message. His jaw locked. His bodyguards in the back immediately stood up, sensing the shift in their boss's demeanor, their hands drifting instinctively toward their suit jackets. "What's wrong?" Penelope asked, her heart rate spiking. Vincent didn't look at her immediately. He stared out the window at the approaching Italian coastline. The message was from Alessandro. "Lorenzo Moretti knows about the plane purchase. He knows you land in 20 minutes. His men have surrounded the private aviation terminal at Fiumicino. It's an ambush." Vincent closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, calculating his moves. The Moretti family was his oldest rival. Buying an entire commercial flight had created a massive blip on the financial radar, drawing exactly the kind of attention he usually avoided. Lorenzo was using this opportunity to strike, while Vincent was lightly guarded. Worse, Lorenzo's men would shoot anyone stepping off that plane. There were no innocent bystanders in a mafia war. Vincent slowly turned back to Penelope. The gentleman who had praised her baking was gone. The boss of the Rossi syndicate had returned. "Penelope," Vincent said, his voice flat, emotionless, and terrifyingly calm. "When this plane lands, things are going to happen very quickly." "What kind of things?" she asked, her hands gripping the armrests. "I need you to listen to me carefully. When the doors open, you do not walk out alone. You stay behind me. You do exactly as I say when I say it." He reached across the divider, his large hand wrapping securely over hers. "I brought you onto this plane. I inadvertently brought you into my world, and now I am the only one who can keep you alive to see Rome." The heavy thud of the Boeing 777's landing gear deploying echoed through the empty cabin like the striking of a judge's gavel. Below them, the sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of Rome stretched out, an ancient city oblivious to the modern warfare about to erupt on its outskirts. Penelope's knuckles were bone white as she gripped the armrests of Seat 2A. The luxury of the first-class pod, which had felt like a sanctuary just hours ago, now felt like a velvet-lined coffin. Vincent stood in the aisle. He had shed his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt to reveal forearms corded with muscle and a faded, intricate tattoo of a crest on his inner wrist. He wasn't looking at her. His dark eyes were fixed on the front cabin door. From the shadows of the rear cabin, his two bodyguards emerged. Penelope finally learned their names as Vincent issued rapid-fire commands in staccato Italian. The taller one, Rocco, moved to the left emergency exit, while the broader, bald man, Matteo, took up a position directly behind Vincent. To Penelope's absolute horror, both men simultaneously unholstered matte black firearms, smoothly threading cylindrical suppressors onto the barrels. "Vincent!" Penelope choked out her voice, trembling so violently she barely recognized it. Are those guns?" Vincent turned to her, his expression softening just a fraction, though his eyes remained hyper-vigilant. "Penelope, look at me." She forced her gaze up to his. "Lorenzo Moretti is a man without honor," Vincent said calmly, the low rumble of his voice grounding her spiraling panic. "He knows I bought this plane, and he assumes I am traveling with my usual security detail. He does not know you are here. My men and I will draw the fire. You will stay behind Matteo. You do not stop running until you are inside the armored vehicle at the bottom of the stairs. Do you understand?" I can't," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I'm just a baker. I make pastries. I shouldn't be here." Vincent stepped closer, reaching out to cup her face in his large, warm hands. The scent of sandalwood and danger enveloped her. "You are here because you are brave enough to fly across the world for your dream. You are strong, Penelope, stronger than the small men who try to break you. Now you must be strong for 3 more minutes. Can you do that for me?" She looked into the deep, dark wells of his eyes, and against all logic nodded. "My box," she stammered, looking down at the temperature-controlled container holding her grandmother's sfogliatelle. My samples for the summit. Matteo looked at the box, then at Vincent, his expression incredulous. We are about to be ambushed by a rival syndicate, and the American wants her cookies, his face seemed to say. Vincent didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy box by its reinforced handle and hoisted it effortlessly. I've got it. Matteo, shield her. The plane taxied to a halt at a remote, isolated tarmac, far from the bustling main terminals of Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport. The seatbelt sign chimed a cheerful, mundane sound that felt entirely absurd, given the lethal tension in the air. Through the small oval window, Penelope saw the mobile boarding stairs driving up to the aircraft. But instead of the usual high-visibility vests of the ground crew, the men operating the stairs were wearing dark windbreakers. They moved with military precision, not the relaxed gait of airport workers. "They're here," Rocco muttered in Italian, peering through the small viewport in the emergency door. 4 men on the stairs, 2 SUVs blocking the taxiway. "Wait for the breach," Vincent commanded, pulling a compact Sig Sauer pistol from a concealed holster at his waist. He held the pastry box in his left hand, the weapon in his right. The heavy lock of the main cabin door clicked and began to hiss open from the outside. "Now," Vincent ordered. Before the door was even fully open, Rocco kicked it outward. It slammed into the first disguised hitman on the landing, sending him tumbling backward, down the metal grating with a sickening crunch. Gunfire immediately shattered the morning air. It wasn't like the movies. It was deafening, chaotic, and terrifyingly fast. The suppressed weapons of Vincent's guards made sharp, spitting thwip sounds, while the unsuppressed automatic fire from Moretti's men roared like thunder. "Go, go, go!" Matteo bellowed, shoving Penelope roughly but securely toward the door. She squeezed her eyes shut and moved. The smell of burning jet fuel was suddenly overpowered by the sharp metallic tang of cordite. She stumbled onto the metal platform of the stairs. Bullets pinged off the aluminum fuselage of the Boeing 777, sounding like violent hail. Below them, a sleek, heavily armored black Maserati Levante suddenly tore around the corner of a nearby hangar, its tires screaming in protest. It slammed into one of the hitmen's SUVs, violently knocking it out of the way, and skidded to a halt directly at the base of the stairs. The driver's side door flew open, and another of Vincent's men laid down suppressing fire with an assault rifle. "Down the stairs, keep your head down," Vincent roared over the deafening noise. He was standing completely exposed on the platform, firing methodically into the tarmac to keep the attackers pinned behind their vehicles. Penelope scrambled down the metal steps, her breath tearing through her throat in ragged sobs. Matteo was right behind her, practically lifting her off her feet as they reached the bottom. He shoved her into the open back door of the Maserati. She fell onto the plush leather seats, gasping for air. A split second later, Vincent threw himself into the SUV beside her, still clutching the pastry box, followed immediately by Rocco and Matteo in the front. "Drive, get us to Tivoli," Vincent shouted. The tires smoked, and the heavy armored vehicle surged forward with bone-rattling force. Bullets struck the reinforced ballistic glass of the rear window, creating spiderwebs of shattered glass, but failing to penetrate. Penelope curled into a ball on the seat, her hands clamped over her ears, shaking uncontrollably. She felt a heavy warmth settle over her. It was Vincent's jacket. He had draped it over her trembling shoulders. "You're safe," his voice cut through the ringing in her ears. He was breathing heavily, a stark contrast to his usual calm, but his tone was gentle. "You're safe, Penelope. It's over." She slowly opened her eyes and looked at him. There was a smear of blood on his cheekbone right next to his scar. It wasn't his. She looked down and saw her pastry box resting securely on the floorboard between his boots, completely intact. The sheer absurdity and terror of the situation finally broke her. Penelope let out a choked laugh that quickly turned into a sob. I just wanted to bake in Rome. Vincent reached out his thumb, gently wiping a tear from her cheek, careful not to smear the blood on his own hand. And you will. I promise you. The sprawling Rossi estate in Tivoli, nestled high in the Sabine Hills overlooking Rome, was a fortress disguised as a Renaissance masterpiece. The armoured Maserati passed through 3 separate wrought-iron security gates, each manned by armed guards with attack dogs, before pulling up to a stunning 3-story villa constructed of pale travertine stone and draped in centuries-old ivy. Penelope stepped out of the vehicle, her legs feeling like lead. The tranquil beauty of the estate, the manicured cypress trees, the burbling marble fountains, the scent of blooming lemon groves was a jarring contrast to the violence she had just witnessed. "Welcome to my home," Vincent said, stepping up beside her. He had cleaned the blood from his face, but the tension in his broad shoulders remained. Inside the villa was a breathtaking display of old-world wealth. Frescoes adorned the vaulted ceilings, and priceless antiques filled the expansive rooms. Yet despite the opulence, it felt cold. It was a house, Penelope realized, not a home. There were no photographs, no personal touches. It was a tactical command center, draped in silk and marble. Vincent led her to a massive sunlit kitchen in the east wing. It was a chef's dream, commercial-grade stainless steel appliances, marble countertops that stretched for miles, and twin wood-fired ovens. "My staff has prepared a guest suite for you," Vincent said, motioning for her to sit at the sprawling island. "You will be completely safe here. The perimeter is secured by 50 men." Penelope sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. "My hotel is in the city center. I need to get my things. My culinary tools." "That is impossible," Vincent said flatly, pulling out a chair opposite her. "Lorenzo's men hit us at the airport because they were tipped off. The purchase of the aircraft was handled through a holding company, but the sudden rerouting and passenger purge left a paper trail. The airline executive I forced the sale upon panicked. He called a private security fixer to handle the legal fallout, and that fixer happens to be on Lorenzo Moretti's payroll. They know you were on that plane." Penelope's breath hitched. "They know about me. They know I risked my exposure to pull a civilian off a commercial flight." Vincent corrected, his eyes dark and serious. "In my world, if an enemy sees you show kindness to someone, they do not see a good deed. They see a vulnerability. They see leverage. Your hotel is already compromised. If you go there, they will take you to get to me." "So, I'm a prisoner?" she asked, her voice wavering. "You are under my protection," Vincent replied firmly. "There is a difference. I have already sent a team to your hotel to retrieve your luggage and your tools. They will be here within the hour." Penelope stared at the pristine marble countertop. Her dream, 3 years in the making, was crumbling. "The summit is tomorrow morning at the Villa Borghese. If I don't show up, I lose my spot. I lose the grant money. I lose everything I've worked for." Vincent leaned forward, his elbows resting on the counter. "I gave you my word on the plane, Penelope. You will present your pastries at the summit." "How?" she demanded, a spark of anger finally cutting through her fear. "You just said there are hitmen looking for me. Are you going to surround my pastry booth with men holding machine guns?" "If I have to, yes," Vincent said, without a hint of irony. He sighed, running a hand through his dark, silver-flecked hair. The gesture made him look suddenly tired, a weary king holding up a crumbling sky. "Lorenzo crossed a line today. He attacked me in broad daylight. By tonight, my associates will dismantle his operations in the city. The streets will be safe for you tomorrow, I swear it." Penelope looked at him. He was a monster to the world, a mafia boss, a killer. But to her, he had been nothing but a savior. He had bought a plane to stop her humiliation. He had shielded her with his own body. He had saved her grandmother's recipe box over his own safety. She stood up slowly, her eyes scanning the magnificent, unused kitchen. "I need flour." Vincent blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift. "Excuse me. I need flour. 00 if you have it. Unsalted butter, ricotta cheese, and oranges." Penelope tied her hair back into a messy bun, the familiar motions anchoring her frayed nerves. "When I get stressed, I bake. And right now, Mr. Rossi, I am terrified." A slow, genuine smile spread across Vincent's face, entirely transforming his lethal features. He reached for a discreet intercom button on the wall. "Get me the head chef," Vincent ordered into the speaker. "And tell him to vacate the kitchen. Miss Hayes requires the room." For the next 4 hours, the heavy silence of the Mafia stronghold was replaced by the rhythmic thumping of dough, the whir of stand mixers, and the rich, comforting aroma of vanilla and caramelizing sugar. Penelope moved through the kitchen like a dancer, her anxiety melting away with every pastry she crafted. Vincent didn't leave. He sat at the island quietly, working on an encrypted laptop, organizing a brutal counteroffensive against the Moretti family. Yet his eyes constantly darted up to watch her. He watched the way she smiled when the dough reached the perfect consistency, the way she hummed softly under her breath. In a life defined by blood betrayal and cold calculation, Penelope Hayes was the warmest, most vibrant thing he had ever seen. As evening fell, painting the Roman sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, Penelope pulled a tray of intricate, shell-shaped sfogliatelle from the oven. She plated one, dusted it with powdered sugar, and slid it across the marble island to Vincent. "A peace offering," she said softly, wiping flour from her forehead. "For invading your kitchen." Vincent closed his laptop. He picked up the pastry, taking a slow bite. Once again, the flavor hit him like a physical blow, a rush of childhood memories, so pure it hurt. "It is extraordinary," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are extraordinary, Penelope." The air between them suddenly felt thick, heavy with an unspoken magnetism. Vincent stood up slowly, walking around the island until he was standing inches away from her. Penelope's heart hammered, but she didn't step back. She tilted her head up to look at him, captivated by the raw intensity in his gaze. "Vincent," she whispered. Before he could respond, the heavy oak doors of the kitchen burst open. Rocco stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face pale. "Boss," Rocco panted, ignoring Penelope completely. "We have a problem. The team we sent to the hotel to get Miss Hayes's luggage, they've been wiped out." Vincent's posture instantly shifted, the romantic tension shattering like glass. "What?" "It wasn't Lorenzo's men," Rocco said, his voice grim. "It was the Sicilians, the Falcone syndicate. They've allied with Lorenzo, and they left a message." Rocco held up a small, blood-stained piece of parchment. "They know about the culinary summit. They aren't going to hit us here. They're going to hit the Villa Borghese tomorrow morning." The blood-stained parchment in Rocco's hand seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the massive kitchen. Penelope stared at it, the sweet, comforting scent of vanilla suddenly nauseating. The Falcone syndicate. A hit at the Villa Borghese. The words echoed in her mind, a death knell not just for her life, but for the dream she had poured her soul into. Vincent's reaction was terrifying in its absolute stillness. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. The warm, captivated man who had just eaten her pastry vanished, entirely replaced by the apex predator of the Roman underworld. He walked over to Rocco, taking the parchment with a gloved hand, his eyes scanning the brutal scrawl. "They are trying to draw me out into the open," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a lethal, chilling register. "They know I won't let her go unprotected. They want to turn a public event into a slaughterhouse to break my influence." He turned back to Penelope, his expression entirely unreadable. "The summit is cancelled for you. You will remain here under maximum guard until I have eradicated Lorenzo and the Falcones." Penelope felt a cold spike of panic, but right behind it came a sudden roaring wave of defiance. She had spent her entire life shrinking. She had shrunk when Arthur humiliated her on the plane. She had shrunk when critics told her a plus-sized woman from Brooklyn couldn't compete in high society. She was done shrinking. "No," Penelope said. The word was quiet, but it rang through the marble kitchen like a gunshot. Rocco and Matteo both stared at her, their mouths slightly parted in shock. No one said no to Vincent Rossi. Vincent's dark eyes narrowed, flashing with a dangerous mix of authority and disbelief. "Penelope, this is not a negotiation. These men do not care about collateral damage. They will walk into that gala with automatic weapons. If you go, you will die. If I don't go, I'm already dead." Penelope fired back, stepping around the island to face him. Her heart was beating frantically, but she forced her chin up. "You don't understand, Vincent. This grant, this summit, it's my entire life's work. I used every penny I had to get here. I endured that monster on the plane to get here. If I hide in your fortress, the Falcones win. The men who want me to be small win." Vincent towered over her, the tension rolling off him in waves. "I can give you 10 times the grant money. I can buy you the finest bakery in Manhattan by midnight. You do not need to risk your life for pastry." "It's not about the money." Penelope shouted, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "It's about earning my place. It's about proving that I belong in that room. You bought a plane to give me a seat at the table. Vincent, are you going to rip me away from it now?" The silence that followed was agonizing. Vincent stared down at her, his jaw locked tight. He saw the fierce, unyielding fire in her amber eyes. She wasn't a civilian cowering in fear anymore. She was a woman fighting for her soul. Slowly, the rigid posture of the Mafia Boss softened just a fraction. He let out a long, heavy breath, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You are going to be the death of me, Penelope Hayes," he murmured, though there was a dark, reverent awe in his tone. He turned sharply to Rocco. "Call Alessandro. Wake up the entire network. We are going to war at the Villa Borghese, the Rossi Syndicate security protocol. Villa Borghese perimeter. Lock down 50 of Vincent's top enforcers, dressed in high-end formal wear, would infiltrate the event as guests, waiters, and valet staff. Vantage points, snipers equipped with suppressed rifles, would be positioned on the rooftops of the adjacent Borghese Museum and the surrounding pine gardens. The inner ring. Rocco Matteo and Vincent himself would remain within a 3-foot radius of Penelope at all times. Extraction. An armored helicopter would be on standby in the Borghese gardens, rotors spinning ready for an immediate dust-off. The next morning, Rome was bathed in brilliant, unforgiving sunlight. The Villa Borghese, a masterpiece of 17th-century architecture, nestled within lush, sprawling gardens, was the epitome of European high society. Luxury cars lined the cobblestone driveway, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and blooming jasmine. Penelope stepped out of the armored Maserati, wearing a stunning, custom-tailored burgundy gown that Vincent had procured overnight. It hugged her curves perfectly, making her feel powerful, regal, and fiercely beautiful. She carried her reinforced pastry box like a shield. Vincent walked beside her. He was dressed in a pristine black tuxedo that managed to make him look even more dangerous. He offered her his arm. "Smile." He whispered, his lips barely moving. "You are the queen of this summit. Let them see you shine." Penelope took a deep breath, looped her arm through his, and walked through the grand arched doors. The main hall was a sensory overload of crystal chandeliers, Renaissance frescoes, and long tables draped in white silk. The finest chefs from Paris, Tokyo, and New York were setting up their elaborate displays. Penelope found her assigned booth, a small, elegant station, near the center of the room. As she carefully arranged her delicate golden-brown sfogliatelle on a tiered silver stand, she could feel the eyes of the other chefs on her. Some looked dismissive, judging her size and her lack of a massive entourage. But Penelope didn't care. She felt Vincent's imposing presence lingering just behind her, a dark shadow offering absolute protection. The judges will begin their rounds in 20 minutes, a frantic event coordinator announced over a microphone. Vincent checked his Rolex, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. "Rocco," he murmured into a microscopic earpiece hidden in his ear. "Status. Perimeter is clear, boss, but we have a blind spot near the service elevators. Matteo is moving to investigate." Penelope's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a candied orange peel on her top pastry. "Vincent," she whispered. "Focus on your art, cara mia," Vincent replied softly, stepping closer so his broad chest brushed against her back. "I am handling the rest." Suddenly the earpiece crackled violently. "Boss, 3 men catering uniforms. They bypassed the metal detectors through the underground wine cellar. They are heavily armed. They're heading for the main floor." "Do not move," Vincent ordered Penelope, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. He unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket, stepping slightly in front of her booth. Across the opulent hall near the massive marble pillars of the service entrance, 3 men in white catering coats pushed a large, draped serving cart into the room. To the untrained eye, they were just bringing out more champagne. To Vincent, the rigid way they walked, their eyes locked onto Penelope's burgundy dress, screamed death. "Rocco, intercept," Vincent commanded into the comms. Before the assassins could reach the center of the room, Rocco and 2 other undercover Rossi enforcers intercepted them. It happened with terrifying, fluid precision. In a world of high society, true predators know how to kill without making a sound. Rocco bumped, accidentally, into the lead assassin, spilling a tray of champagne. In the split second, the assassin looked down. Rocco drove a concealed, suppressed pistol into the man's ribs under his coat. "Thwip! Thwip!" The man gasped, his eyes rolling back, and Rocco smoothly caught him pretending to help an ill waiter out of the room. But the second assassin realized what was happening. He reached beneath the white cloth of the serving cart, pulling out a compact submachine gun. "Gun!" Matteo yelled from the balcony above. The assassin didn't aim at Vincent. He aimed directly at Penelope. Vincent moved faster than humanly possible. He lunged across the booth, tackling Penelope to the marble floor, just as a hail of bullets shattered the crystal chandelier above them. Glass rained down like deadly snow screams, erupting through the grand hall as billionaires and elite chefs dove for cover. "Bang, bang, bang, asterisk." Vincent fired his own weapon over the counter. 3 perfectly aimed shots that dropped the second assassin instantly. But the third man, the leader of the hit squad, a towering Sicilian with cold, dead eyes, sprinted through the chaos, vaulting over a neighboring pastry display. He landed right beside Penelope's booth, raising his weapon point blank at Vincent, who was still covering Penelope with his body. Penelope didn't scream. Operating on pure, raw instinct, she grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a solid, cast-iron presentation skillet she had brought for her display. With a ferocious cry, she swung it upward with all her might, smashing it directly into the Sicilian's knee. The bone snapped with a sickening crack. The assassin roared in pain, his shot firing wildly into the ceiling. That split-second distraction was all Vincent needed. He swept the man's legs out from under him, disarming him with a brutal strike to the wrist, and pressed the hot barrel of his Sig Sauer directly against the center of the assassin's forehead. "Tell Falcone," Vincent hissed, his eyes blazing with demonic fury, "that Rome belongs to me. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he brought the butt of the gun down viciously against the man's temple, knocking him unconscious. The entire skirmish had lasted less than 30 seconds. Vincent immediately dropped his weapon, pulling Penelope up from the floor. He framed her face in his hands, his eyes frantically searching her for injuries. "Are you hit, Penelope? Talk to me." I'm okay," she gasped, her chest heaving. She looked down at the unconscious assassin, then at the heavy cast-iron skillet in her hand. A hysterical, breathless laugh escaped her lips. "I think I broke his leg." A fierce, incredibly proud smile broke across Vincent's face. "You did cara mia. You certainly did." The grand hall was in utter pandemonium. Sirens wailed in the distance. Security was rushing in, but Vincent's men had already secured the perimeter and were quietly dragging the incapacitated assassins out through the service doors before the Italian police could arrive. Amidst the screaming and the shattered crystal, a group of 4 older distinguished men in bespoke suits stood near the entrance, surrounded by their own private security. They were the head judges of the culinary summit. They looked utterly horrified, but they had not fled. Penelope looked at her booth. Miraculously, the silver-tired stand had survived the fall of the chandelier. Her sfogliatelle sat perfectly intact, dusting of powdered sugar, glowing under the emergency lights. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her ruined burgundy gown, and picked up a silver serving tray. She placed 4 of the pastries on it and walked deliberately through the debris, straight toward the trembling judges. "Gentlemen," Penelope said, her voice shaking but her posture completely straight. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you have a tasting to complete." The head judge, a legendary Michelin-starred chef from Paris, stared at her in sheer disbelief. He looked at the chaos, looked at the terrifying, blood-spattered Mafia Boss standing protectively behind her, and then looked at the pastry. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he picked up a sfogliatelle and took a bite. The crunch of the perfectly laminated dough echoed in the tense silence. The judge closed his eyes, chewing slowly. A profound look of shock followed by absolute reverence washed over his face. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. He looked at Penelope, tears welling in his eyes. "The texture, the ricotta, it is flawless. Absolute perfection." The other judges quickly followed suit. Within minutes, the verdict was unanimous. Right there, amidst shattered glass and the lingering smell of gunpowder, Penelope Hayes was awarded the Grand Culinary Grant of Rome. 1 month later, the bell above the door of La Dolce Vittoria, Brooklyn's newest and most luxurious bakery, chimed softly. Penelope stood behind the gleaming marble counter, wiping her hands on her apron. The shop was massive, funded entirely by the grant money, though the building itself had been anonymously purchased by a holding company in Switzerland. The door opened and a man stepped inside. He wore a custom charcoal suit, his dark hair lightly silvered at the temples. The dangerous, predatory aura that usually surrounded him was muted, replaced by a warm, deeply affectionate glow as his eyes locked onto Penelope. "I hear the head chef here is fiercely protective of her kitchen," Vincent Rossi said, walking up to the counter. "I was hoping to negotiate a tasting." Penelope beamed, walking around the counter and throwing her arms around his neck. Vincent buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of vanilla and sugar. He had kept his promise. The Moretti and Falcone families had been dismantled. The streets were quiet. And though he would always be a man of the shadows, he had built a fortress of light just for her. "No negotiations necessary," Penelope whispered, kissing the faint scar on his cheek. "For you, Mr. Rossi, I always have something sweet." From a humiliating encounter on a transatlantic flight to a deadly shootout amidst high society glamour, Penelope proved that true strength isn't about the space you take up, it's about the fire within. Vincent bought an airplane to save her pride, But Penelope fought a mafia hitman with a cast-iron skillet to save her dream. Love Danger and perfectly baked sfogliatella proved to be the ultimate recipe for victory. If you loved this thrilling mafia romance hit, that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more pulse-pounding dramatic stories.